We'd go overseas now, and we've got Tom Switzer from the US Study Centre to do just that. Tom, congressional elections, I mentioned that it's been a bit of a stunning rebuke for the Democrats and for Barack Obama. How have you seen it?
Well, absolutely that. I mean, if you look at the average swing against a president's party in the midterm elections, it's about 25 seats in the House. This was more than 60 seats that the Republicans have picked up. So it's a forceful repudiation of not just President Obama, but the Democrat agenda generally. Moreover, it's not just the 6 extra seats that the Republicans have picked up in the Senate. They've also picked up a lot of governorships and state assemblies. Now, this is crucial because that means that they're in prime position to be responsible for reallocating, redistricting a lot of these valuable seats that are going to happen over the next 10 years. So they are reshaping the political environment. So much for the argument that America's moved in a progressive direction. America is still a centre-right nation.
Well, I want to play some footage of Barack Obama. I've got some footage of him before the results were known and then some footage of him afterwards, and it's a pretty different approach. Let's take a look at the first piece.
Have you noticed when you want to go forward, what do you do with your car? You put it in D. When you want to go backwards, what do? You put it in R. That's not a coincidence. I don't know about you, but I want to move forward.
Well, going forward, Tom Switzer, he'll be doing it with a controlled Congress, at least in the lower house, by his opponents, the Republicans.
I suspect what you'll get over the next 2 years is gridlock. I mean, the House can propose all they like. They may even get it through the Senate with a few Conservative Democrats, but the President has a veto. So I don't think that the Republicans will be able to get much up. As for the President, I think the broad transformative agenda that he outlined 2 years ago is basically dead, at least for the next 2 years. I mean, look, Americans are in a very foul mood. They're deeply angry. They're bogged down in a very unpopular war, unwinnable war, according to a broad cross-section of the Americans. And they have all sorts of economic problems. I mean, a lot of economists think they'll go into a double dip.
Well, now that that attitude of Americans has been displayed in the election result, the words of Barack Obama immediately after the result are a lot more conciliatory, a lot more interested in compromise. We'll bring Paul Kelly and Michael Stutchbury in, but first let's take a look at Obama's words.
For the last 2 years, we've made progress, but clearly too many Americans haven't felt that progress yet, and they told us that yesterday. And as president, I take responsibility for that. What yesterday also told us is that no one party will be able to dictate where we go from here, that we must find common ground in order to in order to make progress on some uncommonly difficult challenges.
Paul Kelly, the President, Barack Obama, he's got a couple more years before he has to face the people. How's he going to go between now and then? Can he get out of it?
Well, the great challenge is going to be trying to resolve the gridlock that they now face in the Congress. And I think the great problem here for the United States is that it needs very substantial policy changes. In particular, it's got an unsustainable budget and debt policy. This has got to be addressed. Radical action is required. And one of the interesting features of global politics today is to contrast the United Kingdom situation, where we've recently had an election. We've got a coalition government between the Tories and the Liberal Democrats. They are taking radical action. They've come together. They're taking radical action through their Westminster system, tougher probably than anything Margaret Thatcher did. That's what's happening under UK governance. Then you go to the United States and you look at the prospect of gridlock. I think that the American system of politics and governance is going to be a real problem for the United States in addressing the policy challenges that America now faces.
Michael Stutchbury, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think this is having global implications. As Paul and Tom have said, there's gridlock in Washington. The Republicans won't put up taxes. The Democrats won't cut spending. The Tea Party, radical small government, but I'm not sure they're going to attack government entitlements, particularly for seniors, and medical subsidies for seniors. So the US, which is holds the reserve currency, the greenback in the world, is really facing this huge budget problem and huge public debt problem which they can't resolve. Because they can't resolve that, their response now, and with their economy so weak, is that late last week Ben Bernanke, the chairman of the US Federal Reserve Board, announced another wave of so-called quantitative easing. $600 billion of US dollars flooded into the US economy, basically printing money. That money's not staying in the US, that's flowing over to Asia, pumping up Asian economies, producing asset bubbles and inflation in Asia. It's pushing down the US dollar and pushing up the Australian dollar. So this is a real bout of instability from the US, not being the world's global superpower, not being able to resolve its economy, potentially destabilising the global economy and putting pressure on Australia.
So where does that leave Barack Obama, Tom Switzer?
Well, the conventional wisdom starting to emerge is that just like Bill Clinton when he lost in 1994, he might, triangulate and move to the centre. Yeah. But I don't think that's in Barack Obama's DNA. He's made it clear time and again that he wants to preside over a political transformation of the landscape in Washington. So if he really wants to be a true Liberal, then he can't really afford to tack to the centre, if you like. Now, I think he's got all sorts of problems in that regard. I mean, one of his real weaknesses now, and this point hasn't been picked up enough, is that he's losing a lot of faith in his Liberal base of the Democratic Party. There was an AP poll a week ago that showed 47% of Democrats want to see him challenged in the presidential primary.
Maybe not challenged, but I think Julia Gillard knows how he feels because she's been eroded on her left as well.
Presidential primary, though. I mean, this is a very interesting development because every president over the last 60 years who tried to get re-elected, if they lost, they were always going to be challenged. You know, Teddy Kennedy against Jimmy Carter in 1980, Ronald Reagan against Gerald Ford in 1976, of course, Pat Buchanan against George H.W. Bush. He can't afford to get a challenge in the presidential primaries in early 2012.
Well, one thing that Barack Obama is very proud of are the healthcare reforms that he managed to negotiate through the Congress. Mitch McConnell from the Republicans, not a well-known name over here in Australia, but he is a very senior elder statesman in the Republican Party. He's made it pretty clear that he'll be gunning straight for those health reforms. We've got something on that. Let's take a look.
Republican Senate leader Mitch McConnell was less conciliatory.
If the administration wants cooperation, it will have to begin to move in our direction.
In a speech today, McConnell said his top priority is to repeal the president's signature achievement, the health care reform bill.
We can and should propose and vote on straight repeal repeatedly. But we can't expect the president to sign it. So we'll also have to work in the House on denying funds for implementation.
Michael Stutchbury, it looks like it's going to be pretty rough and ready in US politics on at least the issue of healthcare.
Well, I think on healthcare that shows the gridlock. The Republicans will want to tear down Barack Obama's healthcare reforms. Will they be able to? I'm not sure. I think it's interesting with Hillary Clinton in Australia this week, this US Secretary of State, with Julia Gillard. They seem to be look like they're getting on well. Gillard, of course, managed to tear down Rudd. Hillary Clinton maybe possibly sees herself as succeeding Barack Obama on the ticket next. But I think the good thing coming out of these OSMIN talks going to be held this week in Australia with Hillary Clinton here is that the US is signalling, according to at least the reports in the Australian, that we're going to have much more US military presence. They say places, not bases, and the US seems to be re-engaging with Asia, and that's the big fear for Australia, that if the US is weakened economically, they'll be weakened strategically and militarily in our region with the rise of China, and that produces a lot of sort of question marks for Australia and how we view the geopolitical issues in our region.
Paul Kelly, how does Australia approach the geopolitical situation? Because we're so dependent on China, or increasingly dependent on China for our exports, but by the same token, the US isn't exactly a minnow in world politics.
I think entrenched Australian government policy under John Howard, Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard is essentially the same. That is, they all believed in a close strategic and military relationship with the United States and developing and enhancing our economic relationship with China. And they don't want to recognise that these two arms of policy are incompatible. I think that is essentially the right way to go. I think the really interesting feature about this is under Julia Gillard, who used to be on the left of the Labor Party, there's absolutely no doubt in terms of her stand on Afghanistan, in terms of the relations she seeks with the United States leadership, in terms of military policy and American forces in this country, she is extremely pro-American. This is a high profile that Gillard has adopted. It's very pro-American, and that's where she wants to be.
It certainly is. It's a way of avoiding moving to the left, or being seen to be moved to the left with this unholy alliance that she has with the Greens. But we are out of time. We will no doubt be talking about the situation domestically as well as how it pans out in the United States, I think, with this new setup, the new paradigm, dare I say it, in the Congress. From the US Studies Centre, Tom Switzer, thanks very much for joining us. And to our panellists, economic editor at The Australian, Michael Stutchbury, and editor-at-large, Paul Kelly, thanks for your company as well. You've been watching Australian Agenda. We'll be back at the same time next week. Thanks for your company.